A helpless girl tell me his story that one day I received a voicemail, "You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you." That was my mother's voice in a voicemail she left at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and there was no argument before it, no warning, no emotional build-up. Just a 31-second message that erased 27 years of being the daughter who fixed everything, paid every bill, solved every emergency, and never once said no, even when it hurt me, and I listened to it twice, hoping I had missed some reason or explanation, but there was nothing to find except finality, so I replied with one word, "Okay," and what my family didn't understand was that this "okay" wasn't surrender. It was the moment I stopped being their safety net, and within 72 hours everything began to collapse exactly like a system losing its main support. The family trust was frozen, the house deal I had been financially holding together was suddenly stopped, and their lawyers started calling me repeatedly as if panic had replaced control overnight, and by the next morning I had 46 missed calls and a message saying, "We have a serious problem," but I didn't respond because for the first time I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was observing everything like a risk analyst watching a system fail, and my name is Vivian, I am 27 years old, living alone in a small apartment in Philadelphia where I was still working on a financial risk report when that voicemail arrived, and her voice had been so calm, almost rehearsed, saying I was no longer welcome and that they were moving on without me, and when I opened the family group chat I found I had been removed completely, not muted or ignored, but erased, and even the group name had been changed to "us," as if I had never been part of it, and for a moment I just sat there in silence because my entire identity in that family had always been the same. To fix, to support, to absorb pressure, and to never question, but this time instead of calling back or apologizing or asking what I had done wrong, I opened my laptop and started doing what I do professionally. I analyzed, and I began listing every financial responsibility I had carried for years. Mortgage payments on the family house, health insurance premiums, my sister Brooke's car loan, medical bills, emergency expenses, repairs, and every "just this once" request that slowly turned into permanent obligation, and as I added everything together the total reached $143,214, and for a moment I just stared at that number because it wasn't just money. It was years of my life translated into responsibility that no one ever thanked me for, and then I went deeper into the documents and accounts and discovered something worse. My name was still legally tied to the house as co-signer and co-owner, and my grandmother's trust fund, which I was solely managing, was still under my control, yet behind my back changes were already happening. Emails had been replaced, forms had been submitted, and my identity was being quietly removed from systems while I was still being used to keep those systems alive, and that's when I realized this wasn't an emotional decision made in anger or misunderstanding, it was structured, planned removal in steps. First financial control, then legal adjustment, then emotional exclusion, and finally complete erasure while still depending on me as long as I remained useful, and in that moment something inside me shifted because I understood for the first time that I was not just part of the system, I was the system holding everything together, and if I stepped away, everything would have to face reality without me. The next morning I didn't wake up with emotion. I woke up with clarity, the kind that comes when denial finally runs out of space, and I opened my laptop again, but this time not to check feelings or memories, but to check structure, accounts, ownership records, emails, and legal documents the way I would analyze a client's financial exposure, and the more I looked, the more obvious it became that this wasn't chaos, it was coordination. Because changes didn't happen randomly, they happened in sequence. First, access to shared accounts was quietly altered, then contact emails were replaced, then financial authority began shifting away from me on paper while my money was still being used in practice, and then the voicemail arrived, not as an emotional break but as a signal that the final step had been completed. Removal from the family itself, and I remember sitting there staring at the screen thinking how strange it was that people who depend on you can still decide to erase you, so I contacted a lawyer, not out of anger, but because I finally understood this was no longer a family conversation, it was a legal structure, and when I met her in her office in downtown Philadelphia she listened without interrupting, reviewing every document I had brought, the mortgage records, the co-signer agreement, the trust paperwork from my grandmother, the email logs, and the financial trail of everything I had been paying for years. And she finally leaned back and said very calmly that I was not just financially involved, I was legally essential, meaning nothing about the house, the mortgage, or the trust could function properly without my signature or approval, and for the first time I understood the real weight of what I had been carrying, not just emotionally but structurally, because I wasn't supporting a family. I was holding a system together that had never given me equal protection in return, and she explained something even more important, that any attempt to remove me from property records without consent could fall under fraud investigation, especially if signatures had been misrepresented or submitted without authorization. And I remember the silence in that room after she said it, because suddenly everything I had been feeling for years had a legal shape, and not emotional confusion, and I didn't rush into revenge or confrontation. I simply followed procedure, and once official notices were sent, everything began to shift faster than I expected. The bank froze the refinance process, flagged inconsistencies in documentation, and paused all movement on the house until investigation was complete. The trust one controlled was placed under stricter oversight with no access allowed without my direct approval, and financial systems that had quietly depended on my continuous input suddenly stopped functioning normally, and that's when the calls started again. But this time they weren't just frequent. They were desperate. My mother called saying I was destroying the family, my father called trying to negotiate time and asking me to understand the situation, and my sister Brooke sent messages shifting between blame, panic, and emotional pressure. But not once did anyone address the actual issue that my name had been used without consent while I was still expected to fund everything, and when a formal legal meeting was finally scheduled with both lawyers present, I walked into that room not as someone defending herself emotionally, but as someone presenting documented reality, and every paper, every transaction, every timeline was placed on the table until there was no space left for interpretation, only facts, and in that meeting I made my final decision. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as correction. I stepped away from financial responsibility that had never been shared equally. I paused what needed to be paused, I allowed legal structure to replace emotional chaos, and I stopped being the invisible foundation of a system that only noticed me when it needed stability, and over the following weeks everything adjusted to reality. The house situation moved toward resolution without my involvement, the trust remained protected under proper rules, and the financial dependency that had once been disguised as family support finally ended, and for the first time in years my life became quiet in a way that wasn't empty but balanced, where every decision I made belonged to me and not to someone else's crisis. This story shows that love, respect, and family bonds are not meant to be one-sided. When one person keeps giving everything, money, time, and emotional support, without being valued or respected, it slowly turns into imbalance, not love. Family is not just about sharing blood relations, it is also about fairness, honesty, and responsibility. Parents and children both have rights and duties toward each other. Children should respect their parents, but parents should also treat their children with justice, appreciation, and equality. No one should be used as a financial or emotional backup while their feelings are ignored. True relationships are built on trust, communication, and gratitude, not manipulation, silence, or control. When trust is broken and honesty is replaced with unfair behavior, boundaries become necessary for self-respect and mental peace. Sometimes stepping back is not disrespect. It is self-protection. And protecting yourself does not mean you stop loving others, it simply means you stop allowing harm. Have you ever been in a situation where you kept helping someone again and again, but when you needed honesty and respect, you were ignored or treated unfairly? And if yes, what do you think is the right balance between staying loyal to family and protecting your own peace and self-respect? This is a fictional story created for moral and educational purposes only. It does not represent real events, people, or families.